Marcus heard the words through the bathroom door at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in September. His wife Elena was on the phone with her sister, voice carrying that particular tone she reserved for conversations she thought he couldn't hear. "I just don't feel like being close anymore, you know? Every time he reaches for me, every time he tries to touch me, I feel this wall go up. I can't explain it, but I don't want his hands on me. I don't want to pretend everything's fine when it's not." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The electric toothbrush in Marcus's hand stopped vibrating. He stood frozen in front of the mirror, toothpaste foam still coating his lips as the words carved themselves into his memory with surgical precision. 23 years of marriage, and his wife was discussing their intimacy like it was a burden she carried, a chore she dreaded, a connection she actively avoided. He rinsed his mouth quietly, the sound of running water masking the tremor in his breathing. Through the thin door, Elena continued her confession to someone who wasn't him. "It's not that he's done anything wrong. Marcus is a good man, reliable, works hard, pays the bills. But when he looks at me with that hopeful expression, when he tries to hold my hand during movies or puts his arm around me in bed, I just freeze up. I've been sleeping on my side facing away from him for months now, pretending to be asleep when he comes to bed." Marcus drove his hands with mechanical precision, each movement deliberate and controlled, while his world quietly imploded behind a bathroom door. He had noticed the distance, of course, the way Elena would stiffen when he tried to kiss her goodbye in the mornings, how she'd suddenly remember urgent tasks whenever he suggested they watch a movie together on the couch, the careful choreography she'd developed to avoid his touch without making it obvious she was avoiding his touch. But hearing it spoken aloud, hearing her articulate the rejection he'd been trying to pretend didn't exist, transformed his suspicions into concrete reality. Marcus turned off the bathroom light and opened the door to find Elena already in bed, positioned exactly as she'd described to her sister. On her side, facing away, the covers pulled up to her chin like armor. He slipped into bed beside her, careful not to let the mattress shift too much, and lay on his back staring at the ceiling. The space between them felt vast despite the fact that only 18 inches of mattress separated their bodies. Elena's breathing was too controlled, too measured. She wasn't asleep either. Marcus was 46 years old, a senior project manager at a construction company that specialized in commercial buildings. He'd built his career on reading blueprints, understanding structural integrity, identifying problems before they became catastrophic failures. But somehow he'd missed the signs that his own marriage was developing cracks in its foundation. They'd met in college, Elena studying elementary education while Marcus worked toward his engineering degree. She was the kind of woman who lit up rooms without trying, who remembered everyone's birthday, who could make small talk with strangers feel like conversations with old friends. She taught second grade for 15 years before switching to substitute teaching when their daughter Amy was born. Amy was now 19, away at college studying psychology, calling home every Sunday with updates about her classes and social life. Their son David was 16, a junior in high school who spent most of his time playing video games or practicing guitar in the garage. Both kids seemed happy, well-adjusted, unaware that their parents had somehow become strangers sharing the same address. The next morning brought the familiar routine of careful distance. Elena made coffee for herself and orange juice for the kids. Marcus poured his own coffee, buttered his own toast, read news on his phone while she packed David's lunch. They moved around each other in the kitchen like dancers who'd memorized choreography designed to minimize contact. "David has that chemistry test today," Elena mentioned without looking at Marcus. "Right, he was studying pretty late last night," Marcus replied to her back as she wiped down counters that were already clean. "Amy called while you were in the shower. She's thinking about changing her major again." "To what this time?" "Something with art therapy. She wants to talk to you about it later." The conversation died there, suffocated by the weight of all the things they weren't saying to each other. David stumbled into the kitchen 20 minutes later, grabbed his lunch and backpack, mumbled something that might have been goodbye, and left for school. Elena followed shortly after, mentioning she had 3 different schools to cover today as a substitute. Marcus sat alone at the kitchen table, surrounded by the debris of a family breakfast, and tried to remember the last time Elena had initiated any physical contact with him. Not sex, just touch. A hand on his shoulder while he worked at his computer. A kiss that wasn't perfunctory. Her fingers intertwined with his while they walked. The realization came slowly, like sunrise over a landscape he'd been too busy to notice changing. Months. It had been months since Elena had touched him with any genuine affection. Every kiss was a goodbye obligation. Every hug was brief and polite. Even when they sat together watching television, she maintained careful distance, never letting their legs brush, never leaning into him during emotional scenes. He'd attributed it to stress initially. Elena had been dealing with her mother's declining health, driving 2 hours each way twice a week to help with appointments and household tasks. She'd been picking up more substitute teaching work to help cover Amy's college expenses. She was busy, tired, overwhelmed. Physical affection was understandably low on her priority list. But busy people still touched the people they loved. Overwhelmed people still sought comfort in familiar embraces. Tired people still wanted connection with their partners, didn't they? Marcus finished his coffee and loaded the dishwasher, his hands moving automatically while his mind replayed Elena's phone conversation from the night before. The clinical way she described her aversion to his touch. The matter-of-fact tone when she discussed pretending to be asleep to avoid intimacy. The casual mention of walls going up whenever he reached for her. At work that morning, Marcus found himself studying his colleagues differently. Jeff from accounting was married to his high school sweetheart, 30 years together, and Marcus had never seen them interact with some form of physical contact. A hand on the back, fingers brushing when they passed papers between them, the way Jeff's wife would adjust his collar when she visited the office. Sarah in human resources had been married for 12 years and regularly complained about her husband's need for constant affection. "He's like a golden retriever," she'd joke, "always wanting to be petted and cuddled. Sometimes I just want to eat dinner without someone's hand on my leg, you know?" But even Sarah's complaints carried an undertone of fondness, of being loved perhaps a little too enthusiastically rather than not at all. Marcus tried to remember the last time Elena had complained about him being too affectionate, too needy, too eager for connection. The absence of those complaints now seemed ominous rather than peaceful. During his lunch break, he sat in his truck in the parking lot and called his sister Rebecca. She was 5 years older, divorced twice, currently dating a man who restored vintage motorcycles and treated her like she was the most fascinating woman alive. "Do you ever just stop wanting to touch someone you love?" Marcus asked without preamble when she answered. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "Hello to you too, little brother. And that's a loaded question if I ever heard one. What's going on?" "I'm asking hypothetically." "No, you're not. You're asking because Elena's pulling away and you don't know why." Marcus had always hated how easily Rebecca could read him, even over the phone. "She doesn't want me to touch her anymore, at all. I heard her telling someone last night that she puts up walls whenever I reach for her." "How long has this been going on?" "Months, maybe longer. I thought it was temporary, but now I'm wondering if something fundamental has changed." Rebecca sighed. "Marcus, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to really think before you answer. When you reach for Elena, when you try to be affectionate, what are you hoping to get from her?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, are you touching her because you want to connect with her as a person, or are you touching her because you want something from her? Validation, sex, reassurance that everything's okay between you?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Marcus opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again. The question hung in the air between them like a challenge he wasn't sure he wanted to meet. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "That might be your problem right there," Rebecca said gently. "Women can sense when touch comes with expectations attached. If Elena feels like every kiss is a request, every hug is a negotiation, every hand on her shoulder is the opening move in a campaign for something more, she's going to start avoiding contact altogether. So what am I supposed to do? Just stop trying? Let our marriage turn into a business partnership? You're supposed to figure out why she's building walls in the first place. And Marcus, you need to consider the possibility that those walls aren't about you being too needy. They might be about something else entirely. After Rebecca hung up, Marcus sat in his truck staring at the construction site across the street. Workers moved with purpose, each person focused on their specific task, contributing to a larger structure that was taking shape beam by beam, wall by wall. Marriage was supposed to be like that, he thought. Two people building something together, each contributing their strengths, creating something stronger than either could manage alone. But what happened when one person stopped showing up to the job site? When one person stopped contributing to the construction, stopped caring whether the foundation held or the walls stood straight? That evening, Marcus arrived home to find Elena in the garden, pulling weeds from around the rose bushes she'd planted 3 years earlier. She wore old jeans and a faded college sweatshirt, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look younger than her 44 years. She was still beautiful, objectively speaking, but beauty meant nothing if it came with "Do Not Touch" sign attached. "How was your day?" Marcus asked, settling into one of the patio chairs nearby. "Fine. Busy. I covered for Mrs. Patterson at Jefferson Elementary. 28 third graders learning multiplication tables." Elena didn't look up from her weeding. "How was yours?" "Also busy. We're having issues with the permits for the downtown project." "That's frustrating." The conversation died again, strangled by politeness and the careful maintenance of emotional distance. Marcus watched his wife's hands work methodically through the soil, noted how she'd positioned herself just out of casual reaching distance, how her body language suggested someone who wanted to be left alone to work in peace. "Elena," he said quietly. Still not looking up. "Are we okay?" Our hands stilled for just a moment before resuming their work. "What do you mean?" "I mean us, our marriage. Are we okay?" "We're fine, Marcus. Why would you ask that?" The lie sat between them like a stone in still water, creating ripples that neither of them acknowledged. Elena's voice carried that particular tone women used when they wanted conversations to end, when they wanted to avoid topics that might lead to uncomfortable territory. "It just feels like we're distant lately, like we're living parallel lives instead of shared ones." Elena sat back on her heels and finally looked at him. Her expression was carefully neutral, the look she probably used with difficult parents during teacher conferences. "We're both busy. We've got a lot on our plates right now." When you're busy at work, you still talk to your colleagues. You still interact with them as human beings. That's different. How is it different? Elena stood up, brushing dirt from her knees with movements that suggested she was done with both the gardening and the conversation. "It just is, Marcus. Some things don't need to be analyzed to death." She walked toward the house, leaving her gardening tools scattered on the ground and Marcus sitting alone among roses that had been perfectly maintained but never cut for indoor arrangements. Even Elena's flowers were kept at arm's length. That night, Marcus lay in bed listening to his wife's carefully controlled breathing and tried to pinpoint exactly when their marriage had transformed from partnership to polite cohabitation. There had been no dramatic fight, no betrayal, no moment of crisis that explained the gradual erosion of intimacy between them. Instead, there had been a slow withdrawal, like tide pulling away from shore so gradually that you didn't notice until you were standing on dry sand where water used to be. He thought about Rebecca's question regarding his motivations for seeking physical connection with Elena. Was he reaching for her because he loved her, or because he needed something from her? The distinction felt important, though he wasn't sure he understood the difference yet. Marcus had always been a physical person. He expressed affection through touch, sought comfort through contact, felt most connected to people when there was some element of physical presence involved. Hugs from his children, handshakes with colleagues, his arm around Elena during movies. Physical touch was his primary love language, though he'd never really considered that other people might experience love differently. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe Elena needed space to feel loved, and he'd been crowding her with his need for contact. Maybe his attempts at affection felt like invasions to someone who processed connection differently. But if that were true, why hadn't she ever said anything? Why hadn't she explained that she needed more space, more independence, more room to breathe? The questions multiplied in the darkness, each one leading to 3 more, until Marcus felt like he was drowning in uncertainty about the woman sleeping 18 inches away from him. Elena, who had shared his bed for over 2 decades, who had given birth to his children, who knew his coffee preference and his work schedule and the way he liked his eggs cooked, had become a mystery he couldn't solve. The next few days brought more careful observation as Marcus began paying attention to patterns he'd previously ignored. Elena's schedule had expanded to fill every available hour. Substitute teaching 3 or 4 days a week, volunteer work at the local animal shelter twice a week, book club on Thursday evenings, coffee with friends on Saturday mornings. She'd constructed a life so full of activities and obligations that spontaneous connection had become nearly impossible. Even when she was home, Elena was in motion, cleaning, organizing, preparing for the next day's activities. She rarely sat still long enough for casual conversation, never lingered over meals, always had something that needed her immediate attention. Marcus realized he'd been complicit in this arrangement. He'd admired Elena's energy, her community involvement, her ability to manage multiple responsibilities. He'd never considered that her busyness might be strategic, a way of avoiding the kind of unstructured time that might lead to uncomfortable conversations or unwanted intimacy. On Friday evening, David went to a friend's house for a sleepover, leaving Marcus and Elena alone in the house for the first time in weeks. Instead of seeing this as an opportunity for connection, Elena immediately announced plans to reorganize the hall closet, a project that had apparently become urgent in the 30 seconds since David had left. "Want some help?" Marcus offered. "No thanks, I have a system." He settled into his recliner with a book, but found himself watching Elena instead. She attacked the closet with military precision, removing everything, sorting items into piles, wiping down shelves with cleaning solution that made the hallway smell like fake lemons. Her movements were efficient, focused, completely absorbed in the task. "Elena," Marcus said during a brief pause in her activity. "What?" She didn't turn around. "When was the last time we went on a date?" Her hand stilled on a stack of old board games. "A date? Just the 2 of us."
Dinner, a movie, something together. We go places together. We go places with the kids. When did we last do something as a couple? Elena resumed her sorting with increased intensity. I don't know, Marcus. Does it matter? We're past the dating stage of our relationship. The casual dismissal of their romantic connection hit Marcus like a physical blow. Past the dating stage. As if courtship and romance were phases people outgrew rather than elements that required ongoing cultivation. Are we past the marriage stage too? The question emerged before Marcus could stop himself. Elena's entire body went rigid. She turned to face him, her expression shifting from careful neutrality to something that might have been anger or fear or both. What is that supposed to mean? It means I feel like we're roommates who happen to share a bank account and a couple of kids. It means I can't remember the last time you looked at me like you were happy to see me. It means I'm starting to wonder if you even like me anymore, let alone love me. Elena stared at him for a long moment, then turned back to her closet project. You're being dramatic. Am I? When was the last time you kissed me without it being a greeting or goodbye obligation? When was the last time you initiated any kind of physical affection? When was the last time you seemed to enjoy my company rather than just tolerate it? Marcus, stop. Stop what? Stop noticing that my wife has been avoiding me for months? Stop caring that we've lost whatever it was that made us want to be married in the first place? Elena slammed a box of old photo albums onto the floor with enough force to make the picture frames on nearby walls rattle. You want to know the truth? Fine. The truth is that I'm tired, Marcus. I'm tired of being responsible for everyone else's happiness. I'm tired of managing everyone else's emotions. I'm tired of being the one who has to make everything okay all the time. I never asked you to make everything okay for me. You don't have to ask. You just expect it. You expect me to be available whenever you need comfort or connection or validation. You expect me to respond positively to your affection whether I'm in the mood for it or not. You expect me to want what you want when you want it. Marcus stood up from his chair, the book sliding off his lap onto the floor. So the solution is to shut me out completely? To build walls so high that I can't reach you at all? The solution is for me to have some space to exist as an individual, rather than just as your wife or the kid's mother or someone whose job is to make other people feel better. They stared at each other across the hallway, surrounded by the contents of their shared life scattered across the floor. Board games from when the kids were younger, photo albums documenting family vacations and holidays, coats that hadn't been worn in years but held memories of places they'd been together. Elena, Marcus said quietly, I love you. I don't want you to be responsible for my happiness. I want to share happiness with you. There's a difference. Is there? Her voice was tired now rather than angry. Because it doesn't feel different from my perspective. It feels like I'm always being asked to give something I don't have anymore. What don't you have? Elena looked around at the mess she'd created, then back at Marcus. I don't know, whatever it was that made me want to be close to people. Whatever it was that made intimacy feel good instead of like work. The admission hung between them like a fragile thing that might shatter if either of them moved too quickly. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, a recognition that this conversation was about more than just their marriage. Elena wasn't just pulling away from him. She was pulling away from the version of herself that had once found joy and connection. When did that change? He asked. I don't know. Gradually. Over time. It's like I woke up one day and realized I'd been performing the role of a loving wife and mother for so long that I'd forgotten how to actually be those things naturally. Elena sat down heavily on the hallway floor, leaning back against the wall with her legs stretched out among the scattered belongings. She looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. I used to love it when you'd put your arm around me during movies, she continued. I used to look forward to the way you'd kiss me goodbye in the mornings. But somewhere along the way, those things started feeling like expectations rather than expressions of love. Like I was supposed to respond in a certain way, supposed to reciprocate in specific ways, supposed to always be available for connection whether I felt like it or not. Marcus lowered himself to the floor across from her, careful to maintain the distance she seemed to need. I never meant for it to feel like work. I know you didn't. But intention and impact aren't always the same thing. They sat in silence for several minutes, processing the weight of Elena's confession. Marcus tried to understand how expressions of love had transformed into burdens in his wife's experience, how his need for connection had somehow become another responsibility on her already overwhelming list. What do you need from me? He asked finally. Elena looked at him with something that might have been surprise. What do you mean? I mean, what do you need from me to feel like yourself again? What would help you remember what it's like to want closeness rather than just enduring it? I don't know if it's about what I need from you specifically. I think it might be about what I need from myself. Space to figure out who I am when I'm not taking care of everyone else's needs. Okay, how do we do that? Elena's expression softened slightly. You really want to know? I want whatever will make you happy, even if it's not what I initially thought would make me happy. She was quiet for a long time, staring at a family photo that had fallen from one of the boxes. It showed the four of them at Amy's high school graduation, arms around each other, smiling at the camera with genuine joy. Marcus remembered that day clearly. Elena had been affectionate, present, genuinely celebratory. She'd held his hand during the ceremony and kissed him spontaneously when Amy's name was called. I think I need some time, Elena said eventually. Not to decide whether I want to stay married, but to remember who I was before I became so focused on being what everyone else needed me to be. What does that look like practically? I don't know yet.
Maybe separate bedrooms for a while? Maybe me taking some trips by myself? Maybe just permission to say no when I don't feel like being affectionate without it becoming a crisis about our relationship? Marcus felt his initial instinct to protest, to negotiate, to find ways to minimize the distance Elena was requesting, but Rebecca's words echoed in his mind. Elena had been building walls because something in their dynamic had made closeness feel unsafe or burdensome,
Pressuring her for more connection when she'd specifically identified that pressure as part of the problem would only make things worse. "Okay," he said. Elena looked surprised again. "Okay? If that's what you need to figure things out, then okay. We'll figure out how to make it work. You're not going to fight me on this? Try to convince me that we should go to counseling instead, or that I'm overreacting? Elena, you just told me that my expressions of love have been feeling like work assignments. Fighting you about needing space would be like trying to solve the problem by creating more of the problem." "Okay," he said. Elena looked surprised again. "Okay? If that's what you need to figure things out, then okay. We'll figure out how to make it work. You're not going to fight me on this? Try to convince me that we should go to counseling instead, or that I'm overreacting? Elena, you just told me that my expressions of love have been feeling like work assignments. Fighting you about needing space would be like trying to solve the problem by creating more of the problem." For the first time in months, Elena looked at Marcus without walls in her expression. Not with love, not with desire, but without the careful guarding that had become her default mode around him. "Thank you," she said. "For what? For listening. For not making this about your ego or your needs. For caring more about understanding me than about getting what you want from me." Marcus nodded, though part of him wanted to point out that what he wanted was for her to be happy, even if that happiness didn't include him in the way he'd originally hoped. But Elena was right about one thing. His motivations for seeking connection with her had been somewhat selfish. He'd wanted her affection because it made him feel loved and secure, not necessarily because he'd been thinking about what would make her feel loved and secure. That night, Elena slept in the guest bedroom for the first time in their marriage. Marcus lay alone in their king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to adjust to the new landscape of his relationship. The physical distance felt strange, but the emotional honesty of their conversation had created a different kind of closeness. For the first time in months, they'd been real with each other, instead of carefully polite. Marcus realized he'd been so focused on the symptoms of their marital problems that he'd missed the underlying disease. Elena's withdrawal wasn't really about him or their relationship specifically. It was about her losing touch with her own desires, her own needs, her own identity outside of her roles as wife and mother and caregiver. The solution wasn't to convince her to want closeness again. The solution was to create space for her to rediscover what she actually wanted, independent of what everyone else needed from her. And that meant Marcus had to learn how to love her without expecting anything in return, at least temporarily. It was going to be the hardest thing he'd ever done, but as he listened to the unfamiliar silence of sleeping alone, Marcus realized it might also be the only chance they had of eventually finding their way back to each other. The guest bedroom became Elena's sanctuary over the following weeks, and Marcus found himself navigating a house that felt simultaneously familiar and foreign. The morning routines shifted subtly but significantly. Instead of the careful choreography they'd developed to avoid each other in the kitchen, Elena simply waited until Marcus left for work before coming downstairs for coffee. Instead of the polite small talk over breakfast, there was honest silence, broken only by David's occasional complaints about upcoming tests or weekend plans with friends. Marcus discovered that solitude had its own rhythm. He woke earlier without Elena's presence beside him, used the shower without coordinating schedules, made his own breakfast while listening to news podcasts instead of maintaining careful conversational neutrality. The absence of tension was almost as noticeable as the absence of companionship. But the real changes began when Elena started saying no. The first time happened on a Wednesday evening when Marcus suggested they attend David's guitar recital together, as they had every semester since he'd started lessons 3 years ago. Elena looked up from the book she was reading and said simply, "I don't feel like going this time. You should go without me." Marcus felt his automatic response rising, the urge to convince her that David would be disappointed, that parents were supposed to support their children together, that her absence would create questions and awkwardness. Instead, he heard himself saying, "Okay, I'll tell David you're not feeling well." "Don't lie for me," Elena said calmly. "Tell him I chose not to come. He's old enough to understand that parents are individuals with their own preferences." Marcus stared at his wife, recognizing something he'd never seen before.
Elena setting boundaries without apology, without elaborate explanations designed to manage other people's emotional reactions to her choices. She was simply stating what she wanted and trusting that the people who loved her could handle that information without falling apart. At the recital, David played 3 pieces competently, but without particular passion. During the reception afterward, several other parents asked where Elena was. Marcus found himself experimenting with Elena's direct approach. She decided not to come tonight, he told Mrs. Richardson, whose son played violin and whose questions always carried undertones of judgment about other families' choices. Mrs. Richardson's eyebrows rose slightly. Is she feeling all right? She's fine, just didn't feel like attending. The conversation died there, leaving Mrs. Richardson looking slightly scandalized by the idea that a mother might simply choose not to participate in every activity her child was involved in. Marcus realized he'd never considered that option either. He'd assumed that good parents showed up to everything, that love was demonstrated through consistent presence rather than quality of attention. Driving home with David, Marcus asked how he felt about his mother missing the recital. "It's fine, Dad. I mean, she's heard me practice those songs like 100 times. It's not like she missed something new." David paused, then added, "Actually, it was kinda nice knowing she wasn't there because she wanted to be, instead of because she felt like she had to be. You know what I mean?" Marcus did know what he meant, though he wasn't sure he liked the implications. How many family activities had Elena attended out of obligation rather than genuine interest? How many conversations had she participated in? How many hugs had she given? How many moments of connection had she shared because she felt expected to rather than because she wanted to? The second major shift came when Elena announced she was taking a pottery class on Thursday evenings. Not couples pottery, not family pottery, just pottery for herself, with strangers who knew nothing about her roles as wife or mother or caregiver. "I've always wanted to try working with clay," she explained to Marcus over dinner on Sunday. "There's something appealing about creating something with your hands that serves no purpose other than being beautiful or useful." "That sounds great," Marcus said, and meant it. Elena's face showed surprise at his enthusiasm. "You don't mind that I'll be gone Thursday evenings?" "Why would I mind?" "Because we already don't spend much time together, and this will be one less evening available." Marcus considered this logic carefully. Elena was right that they didn't spend much quality time together, but he was beginning to understand that forced togetherness wasn't the same as chosen intimacy. If Elena was there physically, but mentally going through the motions of being present, were they really together anyway? "I think you should do things that make you happy," Marcus said, "even if they don't include me." Elena studied his face as if looking for signs of passive aggression or hidden resentment. When she found neither, something in her posture relaxed. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For listening. For not making this about your ego or your needs. For caring more about understanding me than about getting what you want from me." Marcus nodded, though part of him wanted to point out that what he wanted was for her to be happy, even if that happiness didn't include him in the way he'd originally hoped. But Elena was right about one thing. His motivations for seeking connection with her had been somewhat selfish. He'd wanted her affection because it made him feel loved and secure, not necessarily because he'd been thinking about what would make her feel loved and secure. That night, Elena slept in the guest bedroom for the first time in their marriage. Marcus lay alone in their king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to adjust to the new landscape of his relationship. The physical distance felt strange, but the emotional honesty of their conversation had created a different kind of closeness. For the first time in months, they'd been real with each other, instead of carefully polite. Marcus realized he'd been so focused on the symptoms of their marital problems that he'd missed the underlying disease. Elena's withdrawal wasn't really about him or their relationship specifically. It was about her losing touch with her own desires, her own needs, her own identity outside of her roles as wife and mother and caregiver. The solution wasn't to convince her to want closeness again. The solution was to create space for her to rediscover what she actually wanted, independent of what everyone else needed from her. And that meant Marcus had to love her without expecting anything in return, at least temporarily. It was going to be the hardest thing he'd ever done. But as he listened to the unfamiliar silence of sleeping alone, Marcus realized it might also be the only chance they had of eventually finding their way back to each other. The guest bedroom became Elena's sanctuary over the following weeks, and Marcus found himself navigating a house that felt simultaneously familiar and foreign. The morning routines shifted subtly but significantly. Instead of the careful choreography they'd developed to avoid each other in the kitchen, Elena simply waited until Marcus left for work before coming downstairs for coffee. Instead of the polite small talk over breakfast, there was honest silence, broken only by David's occasional complaints about upcoming tests or weekend plans with friends. Marcus discovered
3 months into their new arrangement, Marcus realized he missed Elena more now than he had when she'd been withdrawn but physically present. The Elena who'd been going through the motions of being a wife had been unsatisfying but predictable. This Elena, who was becoming herself again, but without including him in that becoming, was fascinating and completely inaccessible. He found himself watching her with the attention he might pay to an interesting stranger at a coffee shop. The way she laughed during phone calls with friends she'd made at pottery class. The way she hummed while cooking meals that reflected her preferences rather than family compromises. The way she moved through their house with ownership rather than the careful tiptoeing he now realized had characterized her behavior for years. Elena was blooming, and Marcus was happy for her. He was also achingly lonely. The loneliness drove him to examine his own life with the same honesty Elena had applied to hers. What did he want when he wasn't focused on what Elena needed to want? What made him happy as an individual rather than as half of a couple? The answers surprised him. Marcus discovered he enjoyed cooking elaborate meals for himself, experimenting with recipes that were too complicated or time-consuming to manage when feeding a family with divergent tastes. He started visiting museums on Saturday mornings, spending hours studying exhibits without worrying about whether anyone else was bored or ready to leave. He reconnected with college friends he'd lost touch with during the years when his social life had revolved around couple friendships and family activities. Most unexpectedly, Marcus began writing. He'd always been good with technical documentation for work, but he found himself composing personal essays about marriage, fatherhood, the challenge of loving someone who was changing in ways you hadn't anticipated. Writing gave him a way to process the complex emotions of supporting Elena's independence while grieving the loss of the partnership he'd thought they'd built together. One evening in late spring, Marcus was writing at the kitchen table when Elena returned from pottery class carrying a small ceramic bowl. She set it on the counter and stood back to admire it. "That's beautiful," Marcus said, looking up from his laptop. "It's imperfect," Elena replied, but she was smiling. "The glaze didn't fire quite right, and one side is slightly thicker than the other. But it's mine. I made it exactly the way I wanted to make it." Marcus closed his laptop and joined her at the counter. The bowl was indeed imperfect by objective standards, but it had character, personality, evidence of the hands that had shaped it. "It looks like you," he said without thinking. Elena glanced at him with curiosity rather than defensiveness. "What does that mean?" "It means it's beautiful and imperfect and completely itself. It doesn't look like anyone else's work." They stood together looking at the bowl, and Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Not desire, not need, not the hungry reaching that had characterized his attempts at connection for so long. Just appreciation. Simple, uncomplicated appreciation for the person Elena was becoming. "Marcus," Elena said softly. "Yeah? I want you to know that this separation, this space we've created, it's not punishment. It's not me trying to hurt you or push you away permanently. I know." "Do you? Because sometimes I catch you looking at me like I'm someone you used to know." Marcus considered this observation. "Maybe that's because you are someone I used to know. But you're also someone I'm getting to know again, and I like the person you're becoming, even if she doesn't need me the way the old Elena did." Elena turned to face him fully. The old Elena needed everyone too much. She needed validation and approval and constant reassurance that she was doing everything right. That kind of need isn't love, it's dependency. And now? Now I'm trying to figure out the difference between needing someone and wanting someone. Between loving someone because they make you feel complete and loving someone because you choose to share your already complete life with them. Marcus felt something click into place, a understanding he'd been circling around for months without quite grasping. Elena hadn't stopped loving him. She'd stopped needing him in ways that had felt like love but were actually forms of emotional dependence. And his hurt over her withdrawal had been as much about losing that dependency as it had been about losing genuine intimacy. That makes sense. Does it? I think I've been confusing need with love too. I thought if you didn't need me to make you happy, it meant you didn't love me. But maybe it means the opposite. Elena picked up her ceramic bowl, running her fingers over its imperfect surface. I don't know if we can find our way back to each other, Marcus. I don't know if I'll ever want to share a bed with you again, or if you'll ever stop feeling like I'm someone who's constantly disappointing you by not being who you thought I was. You're not disappointing me, Marcus said. You're surprising me. Every day, you're surprising me. Is that good or bad? It's interesting. For the first time in years, I have no idea what you're going to do or say or think about things. You've become unpredictable. Elena smiled, the first genuine smile she directed at him in months. I've become myself. That night, Marcus lay in his now familiar solitary bed and thought about the difference between loving someone who needed you and loving someone who chose you. Elena was right that the old dynamic between them had been built on various forms of dependency rather than genuine partnership. She'd needed his approval, his financial security, his reliability. He'd needed her affection, her availability, her consistent presence in the roles she'd expected her to fill. But need-based relationships were fragile because they were built on deficit rather than abundance. When Elena had become strong enough to meet her own needs for validation and security, the foundation of their connection had crumbled. And when Marcus could no longer count on Elena to meet his needs for affection and companionship, he'd felt abandoned rather than proud of her growth. Learning to love without needing was apparently much more difficult than either of them had anticipated. But Marcus was beginning to suspect it might also be much more rewarding. The breakthrough came in early summer, 4 months after Elena had moved into the guest bedroom. Marcus was in the backyard grilling dinner for himself when Elena appeared beside him carrying her own plate of food. "Mind if I eat out here?" she asked. "Of course not." They settled at the patio table that had been unused since Elena had stopped joining him for meals. The evening was warm, the garden Elena had maintained was in full bloom, and the silence between them felt comfortable rather than strained. "I've been thinking about what you said," Elena said eventually, "about learning to love without needing." Marcus looked up from his steak. "What about it?" "I think I understand now why I pulled away from you so completely. It wasn't just that your touch felt like pressure. It was that I could feel how much you needed my response to it. Every kiss, every hug, every attempt at affection came with this underlying current of need that I was supposed to fulfill. I never meant to put that pressure on you. I know you didn't. But intention and impact aren't the same thing. And the impact was that I felt responsible for your emotional well-being in addition to everyone else's." Marcus set down his fork. "So how do we love each other without that pressure?" "Maybe we start by loving ourselves first. Maybe we each become people who are happy with our own lives, who have our own interests and friends and purposes. And then we see if we want to share those full, complete lives with each other."
Is that what you've been doing these past few months? Becoming happy with your own life? Elena considered this question seriously. I've been learning what makes me happy when I'm not focused on making everyone else happy. And the answer surprised me. What is it? Simple things. Making pottery that no one else has to like. Taking walks without destinations. Reading books that have nothing to do with being a better wife or mother or person. Having conversations with people who don't know my history or my roles. Marcus felt a pang of something that wasn't quite jealousy, but was close. Do you miss any of it? The way we used to be together? I miss some of it. I miss the early years when we were both still figuring out who we were and what we wanted. I miss feeling like we were building something together instead of maintaining something we'd already built. Do you think we could build something new? Elena looked at him across the table, and Marcus saw consideration in her expression, instead of the automatic deflection that had characterized her responses to relationship questions for so long. "I think we might be able to," she said slowly. "But it would have to be different. It would have to be built on who we actually are now instead of who we were 20 years ago, or who we think we're supposed to be. I'd like to try that. Even if the new thing doesn't look like what you expected marriage to look like, especially then." They finished dinner as the sun set behind Elena's rose garden, and for the first time in months, Marcus felt hopeful about their future together. Not because Elena had returned to being the woman he'd married, but because she was becoming someone he was genuinely curious to know better. After Elena went inside, Marcus remained on the patio thinking about the conversation. She was right that their old relationship had been built on need rather than choice. But she was also right that it was possible to build something new based on who they were becoming rather than who they'd been. The question was whether Marcus was brave enough to love Elena as the person she was choosing to be, rather than trying to convince her to return to being the person he'd needed her to be. It was a harder kind of love, one that required him to grow as much as he was asking her to return to him. But looking at Elena's roses blooming in the gathering darkness, Marcus thought it might be worth the risk. After all, the most beautiful gardens weren't the ones that stayed exactly the same year after year. They were the ones that grew and changed and surprised you with what was possible when you gave them room to flourish. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Marcus woke to find Elena in the kitchen making pancakes for the first time in over 6 months. But these weren't the perfunctory family breakfast pancakes she'd made out of obligation. These were elaborate blueberry pancakes with homemade syrup, the kind of breakfast someone made when they felt like celebrating something. "What's the occasion?" Marcus asked, accepting the plate she offered him. "I got a job offer yesterday, a real teaching position, not substitute work. 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary. They want me to start in the fall." Marcus felt genuine excitement for her success. "Elena, that's wonderful. Congratulations." "Thank you. I haven't taught my own classroom in years, and I'm nervous, but I'm also excited in a way I haven't been about work in a long time. You'll be amazing." Elena smiled, and Marcus realized this was the first time in months she'd shared good news with him as if she actually wanted to share it, rather than felt obligated to inform him of changes in her schedule. "There's something else," Elena said, settling across from him with her own plate. "The job comes with health insurance and a retirement plan. Real financial independence for the first time since Amy was born." Marcus nodded, understanding the significance, even though it stung slightly. Elena was building a life that didn't depend on him financially any more than it depended on him emotionally. "That must feel really good," he said. "It does. It feels like I'm becoming an adult again, instead of just playing one while actually being dependent on other people for my basic security." They ate breakfast together in comfortable silence, and Marcus found himself appreciating this version of shared time more than he'd appreciated the forced togetherness they'd maintained for years. Elena was present because she wanted to share her good news, not because breakfast was something married people were supposed to do together. The summer progressed with Elena preparing for her return to teaching, and Marcus discovering interests he'd neglected during the years when his identity had been entirely wrapped up in being a husband and father. He started hiking alone on weekends, joined a photography group that met monthly to explore different locations around the city, and enrolled in a creative writing workshop that met Tuesday evenings. The writing workshop proved to be the most significant development. Marcus had always been competent at technical writing for work, but he'd never considered himself creative. Under the guidance of Sarah Chen, a published novelist who taught the class, Marcus began exploring personal narrative and discovered he had things to say about marriage, parenthood, and the challenge of loving someone through major life changes. His first piece, about learning to sleep alone after 20 years of sharing a bed, sparked a discussion in class about the difference between solitude and loneliness. Marcus found himself articulating insights he hadn't known he possessed about the value of independence within relationships. "The hardest thing," he read from his essay, "wasn't missing Elena's physical presence in bed. It was accepting that I could be happy alone.
because that acceptance meant I was choosing to be married rather than needing to be married. And choice carries responsibility in a way that need doesn't. After class, Sarah approached him with feedback that surprised him. You have a real gift for examining emotional complexity without sentimentality. Have you considered submitting this piece to magazines that publish personal essays? Marcus hadn't considered it, but the idea intrigued him. He'd spent decades being competent at work that paid well but didn't particularly fulfill him. The possibility of being good at something creative, something that reflected his authentic thoughts and experiences, felt like discovering a new aspect of himself. When he mentioned the suggestion to Elena over dinner the following week, she looked up from her grading with genuine interest. You should definitely try submitting it. You've always been a good writer, even in the emails you send about David's school activities. You have a way of making ordinary situations sound interesting. You think so? I know so. Remember the email you sent to Amy's guidance counselor about her schedule conflicts? You managed to explain a complicated situation clearly and diplomatically. That's not easy. Marcus felt something warm spread through his chest. Elena was encouraging his writing not because she felt obligated to support her hobbies, but because she genuinely believed he had talent worth developing. Her opinion mattered to him, but it mattered because he respected her judgment, not because he needed her approval to feel good about himself. "Thank you," he said. "That means a lot. I'm proud of you for trying something new. It takes courage to explore parts of yourself you haven't developed before." The mutual respect in their conversation felt different from anything they'd shared in years. They were relating to each other as individuals who happened to be married, rather than halves of a couple unit. Marcus found this dynamic much more interesting than the careful politeness they'd maintained for so long. As summer turned toward fall, Elena prepared to return to classroom teaching, and Marcus prepared to submit his first personal essay for publication. They were both building lives that reflected their individual interests and capabilities, rather than just their shared responsibilities as parents and homeowners. The question of whether those individual lives would eventually merge back into a genuinely intimate partnership remained unanswered. But Marcus was beginning to understand that the answer didn't matter as much as he thought it did. He loved Elena, but he no longer needed her to love him back in specific ways in order for him to be happy with his life. And somehow, that freedom from need was making it possible for genuine affection to return. Not the desperate reaching that had characterized his behavior during Elena's withdrawal, but the kind of easy appreciation he might feel for any interesting person whose company he enjoyed. It was a fragile beginning, but it felt more solid than anything they'd built on need and obligation. Whether it would be enough to bridge the gap between them remained to be seen. But for the first time in months, Marcus was genuinely curious to find out rather than desperately needing to know. The publication acceptance came on a Tuesday morning in October. Marcus stared at the email from Contemporary Marriage Quarterly for several minutes before fully processing that they wanted to publish his essay about learning to sleep alone. The editor's note praised his honest examination of marital evolution and offered a modest payment that seemed almost secondary to the validation of being told his writing was worth sharing with strangers.
Elena was in the garden when he found her, preparing the rose beds for winter. She looked up from her pruning shears as he approached, and Marcus realized he'd unconsciously sought her out to share the news before calling anyone else. "They're going to publish my essay," he said without preamble. Elena straightened, a genuine smile spreading across her face. "Marcus, that's incredible. Which magazine?" "Contemporary Marriage Quarterly. It's not huge, but it's legitimate. People actually subscribe to it." "I'm so proud of you." Elena pulled off her gardening gloves and stepped closer. "This is exactly what you should be doing, writing about things that matter to you." For a moment, they stood facing each other in the garden, sharing excitement about his achievement. Marcus felt an impulse to hug Elena, to celebrate with physical contact the way they used to mark good news. But instead of acting on the impulse automatically, he paused and considered whether the gesture would be about his genuine happiness or about his need for her to participate in his joy in a specific way. The pause was brief but significant. When Marcus did reach for Elena, it was with the lightness of someone offering rather than taking. She stepped into the embrace naturally, without the tension that had characterized their physical interactions for so long. "Thank you for encouraging me to submit it," Marcus said, breathing in the scent of Elena's hair mixed with autumn air and roses. "Thank you for becoming someone worth encouraging," Elena replied. And Marcus understood she wasn't talking only about his writing. The hug lasted exactly as long as it felt good to both of them, ending when Elena stepped back to return to her gardening rather than when Marcus decided he'd gotten enough contact. The difference was subtle but profound. That evening, Elena surprised him by suggesting they celebrate his publication acceptance by going out to dinner together. Not because it was something married couples should do, but because she genuinely wanted to mark the occasion, and her company felt like the right way to do it. They chose a small Italian restaurant they'd never been to before, a place with no history attached to it from their earlier life together. Over wine and pasta, they talked about Marcus's writing, Elena's preparation for the school year, their children's evolving independence. The conversation flowed easily because neither of them was trying to achieve anything beyond enjoying each other's company. "You know what I realized today?" Elena said as they waited for dessert. "I was happy about your good news in a way I haven't been happy about anyone else's success in years." "What do you mean?" "I mean I was happy for you, not happy because your success reflected well on me as your wife or made my life easier in some way. It was pure happiness about something good happening to someone I care about." Marcus considered this distinction. "That sounds like how you'd feel about a friend's success." "Exactly, and I haven't thought of you as a friend in a long time. You've been my husband, my partner, my co-parent, but not really my friend." "Do you want to be friends again?" Elena smiled. "I think we might already be becoming friends again. Real friends, not just people who are friendly because we live together." The word friends might have felt insufficient to Marcus 6 months earlier, when he'd been desperate to restore romantic intimacy. But sitting across from Elena in a restaurant where they'd chosen to spend time together rather than felt obligated to maintain their relationship, friendship felt like a significant achievement. "I'd like that," Marcus said. "I'd like to be your friend." Even if friendship is all we ever manage to rebuild? Even then, though I suspect friendship might be a better foundation for everything else than need ever was. They shared tiramisu and talked about books they'd been reading, places they'd like to travel, dreams they'd set aside during the years when their lives had been entirely consumed by practical responsibilities. Elena mentioned wanting to take a pottery workshop in Italy someday. Marcus talked about a photography expedition to Iceland he'd seen advertised. Neither of them automatically assumed the other would be included in these hypothetical adventures, but neither of them excluded the possibility either. Driving home, Elena reached over and turned up the radio when a song came on that she liked. She sang along unself-consciously, tapping her fingers on her knee in rhythm. Marcus watched her from the corner of his eye and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Simple appreciation for Elena's company without any agenda attached to it. "Thank you for tonight," he said as they pulled into their driveway. "Thank you for giving me something worth celebrating." That night, Elena knocked on Marcus's bedroom door around 10 o'clock. When he opened it, she was holding a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. "I thought we should properly toast your publication," she said, "if you're not too tired." Marcus opened the door wider, and Elena settled into the armchair by the window while he sat on the edge of the bed. She poured champagne for both of them, and they raised their glasses in a toast that felt ceremonial in the best way. "To becoming who we're supposed to be," Elena said. "To becoming who we're supposed to be," Marcus echoed. They sipped champagne and talked quietly about the changes they'd both experienced over the past months. Elena described the satisfaction of returning to teaching, of remembering what it felt like to be competent and valued for her professional skills rather than just her availability to meet other people's needs. Marcus talked about discovering aspects of himself he'd neglected during the years when his identity had been entirely wrapped up in being a provider and partner. Writing, hiking, photography, conversations with people who knew him as an individual rather than as half of a couple. "Do you ever miss it?" Elena asked. "I miss parts of it. I miss feeling like we were building something together.
I miss having someone to share daily experiences with automatically. But I don't miss the pressure or the way we'd both stopped growing as individuals. I miss feeling safe with you. Not financially safe, but emotionally safe. Like I could tell you anything and you'd still love me. You can still tell me anything. Can I? Because I feel like I've told you some pretty difficult things over the past few months, and you've handled them better than I expected. But part of me is still waiting for you to get tired of being patient and demand that I go back to being who I used to be. Marcus set down his champagne and looked directly at Elena. I can't promise I'll never get frustrated or disappointed when you make choices I don't understand. But I can promise I'm not interested in going backward. The woman you're becoming is more interesting than the woman you used to be, even if she's also more challenging. How am I more challenging? You have opinions now. You say no when you don't want something. You're not constantly trying to manage my emotions or make everything smooth and easy. You're a real person instead of a projection of what I thought a wife should be. Elena was quiet for a long time, swirling champagne in her glass and looking out the window at the garden she'd been preparing for winter. "Marcus," she said finally. "Yeah? I think I'd like to try sleeping in the same room again. Not because I think we should, or because I'm ready for physical intimacy, but because I miss falling asleep next to someone I trust." Marcus felt his heart rate increase, but not with the desperate hope that would have characterized his response to this suggestion months earlier. Instead, he felt careful optimism about the possibility of rebuilding closeness gradually, without pressure or expectations. "Are you sure? Because there's no rush. I don't want you to feel like you need to take steps you're not ready for." "I'm sure, but I want us to be clear about what I'm ready for and what I'm not. I want to share space with you again, but I'm not ready to share my body with you. And I don't know when or if that will change." "That's fine."
More than fine. I'd rather have you next to me because you want to be there than have you avoid me because you feel pressures. Elena finished her champagne and stood up. Okay then, give me a few minutes to get ready, and then I'll come back. After Elena left, Marcus quickly straightened the bedroom and changed the sheets, not because the old ones were dirty, but because the moment felt significant enough to deserve fresh linens. When Elena returned wearing pajamas and carrying her pillow, Marcus felt nervous in a way he hadn't since they were dating. They settled into bed with careful space between them, and Marcus was surprised by how natural it felt. Elena's presence beside him was comforting without being distracting. She was close enough that he could hear her breathing, but far enough away that her nearness didn't feel like an invitation for anything beyond companionship. "This is nice," Elena said softly in the darkness. "It is." Marcus her? Thank you for not making this weird or putting expectations on it. Thank you for trusting me enough to try it. They fell asleep easily, and Marcus woke the next morning feeling more rested than he had in months. Elena was still beside him, reading a book with her coffee, and the scene felt both familiar and entirely new. "Good morning," she said without looking up from her book. "Good morning. How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in a long time. You?" "Same." They settled into a routine of sharing the bedroom while maintaining clear boundaries about physical intimacy. Elena continued sleeping on her side of the bed, and Marcus respected the space between them without making it feel like a chasm. Sometimes they talked quietly before falling asleep. Sometimes Elena read while Marcus wrote in a journal he'd started keeping. Sometimes they simply enjoyed the comfort of shared presence without conversation. The return to shared sleeping arrangements didn't fix their marriage, but it created space for gradual reconnection without pressure. Elena began touching Marcus casually again, a hand on his shoulder while she passed behind his chair, fingers brushing his when she handed him coffee. These moments of contact felt precious because they were freely given rather than expected or negotiated. November brought the publication of Marcus's essay and an invitation to read at a local bookstore's monthly author series. Elena offered to attend the reading, not because spouses were supposed to support each other's professional activities, but because she was genuinely curious to hear Marcus share his work with an audience. The bookstore reading was small, maybe 20 people gathered in folding chairs between stacks of novels and poetry collections.
Marcus read his essay about learning to sleep alone, and Elena listened from the back row as he articulated insights about marriage and independence that she'd never heard him express so clearly. During the question and answer session afterward, an older woman asked Marcus how his wife had responded to his public examination of their marital difficulties. "She encouraged me to write about it," Marcus said. "She understood that telling the truth about our challenges was more important than protecting an image of perfect partnership that wasn't accurate anyway." Elena felt something shift inside her chest as she listened to Marcus speak about their relationship with honesty and respect. He wasn't exposing her vulnerabilities or making her the villain in his story of personal growth. He was acknowledging that they'd both needed to change and that growth had required temporary distance that ultimately made them better partners. After the reading, they went for coffee, and Elena told Marcus how proud she was of his willingness to be vulnerable in public about their marriage. "It's scary to admit that perfect love stories aren't actually perfect," she said, "but it's also liberating. Maybe other people feel permission to be honest about their own relationships when they hear someone else being honest about theirs." "Is that why you came tonight? To support my honesty?" "I came because I wanted to see you in your element. I wanted to watch you do something you're good at that has nothing to do with me or our family. I wanted to see Marcus the writer, not just Marcus the husband." "And what did you think?" "I think you're more interesting than I gave you credit for during the years when I thought I knew everything about you." They walked slowly back to their car, and Elena surprised Marcus by taking his hand. Not romantically, not as a prelude to anything else, but simply because holding hands felt good and she wanted the connection. "Elena," Marcus said as they reached the car, "yeah? I love you. Not because I need you or because I'm supposed to love you, but because you're someone worth loving, even if loving you looks different than it used to." Elena stopped walking and turned to face him. "I love you too. I'm not sure what that means for us practically, but I know it's true." "Maybe it doesn't have to mean anything beyond what it means right now." "Which is what?" "Which is that we're two people who care about each other and are figuring out how to build a life together that honors who we actually are instead of who we thought we were supposed to be." Elena smiled and leaned forward to kiss Marcus softly. The kiss lasted only a few seconds, but it felt different from the obligatory kisses they'd exchanged for years. It felt like a choice rather than an expectation, like a gift rather than a debt payment. "Okay," Elena said, "let's see what we can build." The winter months brought gradual reconstruction of intimacy between Marcus and Elena, but it looked nothing like their earlier relationship. They spent time together because they enjoyed each other's company, rather than because they were married. They supported each other's individual pursuits without feeling threatened by interests that didn't include both of them. They shared a bed and occasional affection without the pressure of meeting specific expectations about frequency or intensity. Marcus published 2 more essays, one about fatherhood and another about learning to love without controlling. Elena thrived in her return to teaching and began taking evening classes toward a master's degree in educational psychology. They both developed friendships and hobbies that existed independently of their marriage while also creating new shared experiences that reflected their evolved understanding of partnership. David noticed the changes in his parents before they announced anything formal. "You guys seem like you actually like each other again," he observed one evening over dinner. "It's nice. For a while there, it felt like you were just roommates who shared a checking account." Amy, home for winter break, was more direct. "Are you two going to stay married? Because I'd rather you get divorced than go back to that weird politeness thing you were doing for like 2 years." Marcus and Elena looked at each other across the dinner table, and Elena answered first. "We're going to stay married, but we're married differently now." "What does that mean?" David asked. "It means we're choosing to be together instead of just staying together out of habit or obligation," Marcus explained. "It means we're married because we want to be, not because we think we should be." "That's good," Amy said. "You're both more interesting as people when you're not trying so hard to be the perfect couple." Later that evening, after the kids had gone to their respective rooms, Marcus and Elena sat together on the couch reading separate books with Elena's feet tucked under Marcus's legs. The physical contact was casual, comfortable, chosen rather than automatic. "Do you think we're going to make it?" Elena asked, without looking up from her book. "Make it how?" "Long term. Do you think this version of being married is sustainable, or are we just going through a honeymoon phase of being honest with each other?" Marcus considered the question seriously.
I think we're going to make it differently than we made it before. I don't think we'll ever go back to the kind of marriage where we take each other for granted or assume we know everything about each other or stop growing as individuals. That sounds harder than the old way. It is harder, but it's also more interesting, and I'd rather have a marriage that challenges me to keep becoming a better person than one that lets me stay exactly the same forever. Elena marked her place in her book and turned to face Marcus.
I want to tell you something. Okay. I'm starting to feel attracted to you again. Not just emotionally, but physically. And it scares me because I don't want to go back to feeling like my body belongs to our relationship instead of to me. Marcus felt desire stir at Elena's admission, but he also felt the wisdom he'd gained over the past months about the difference between wanting something and needing it. What would help you feel like your body belongs to you? He asked. Knowing that I can say yes or no to physical intimacy based on what I actually want rather than what I think you need or what I think I should want. You can. You always could. But I understand that it didn't feel that way before. And knowing that our emotional connection doesn't depend on whether I'm ready for physical connection. That you'll still love me and be my friend and want to build a life together even if sex remains off the table indefinitely. Elena, I promise you that our emotional intimacy isn't conditional on physical intimacy. I want you physically because I love you emotionally, not the other way around. Elena studied his face as if looking for signs of deception or hidden agenda. When she found neither, she moved closer to him on the couch. I think I might be ready to try being physical with you again. Slowly, without expectations about what it leads to or how often it happens. Are you sure? I'm sure I want to try. I'm not sure about anything beyond that. Marcus reached for Elena's hand, intertwining their fingers and bringing her knuckles to his lips for a soft kiss. Then we'll try. And we'll figure out what works for both of us as we go. Thank you for being patient while I figured myself out. Thank you for doing the work to figure yourself out instead of just enduring a marriage that wasn't working. They made love that night for the first time in over a year, and it was unlike anything they'd shared before. Elena was present in a way she hadn't been even in the early years of their marriage, fully engaged and responsive because she was choosing to be there rather than feeling obligated. Marcus was attentive without being needy, focused on Elena's experience rather than his own validation. Afterward, they lay together talking quietly about the experience, checking in with each other about what had felt good and what they wanted to explore further. The conversation was honest and intimate in a way their previous physical relationship had never quite achieved. I didn't know sex could feel like that, Elena said, like something I was actively participating in instead of something I was providing. I didn't know I could want you without feeling like I was taking something from you, Marcus replied. Maybe that's what happens when two complete people choose to share themselves with each other instead of two incomplete people trying to use each other to feel whole. Spring brought new growth in both Elena's garden and their relationship. They began making plans together again, not because they felt obligated to include each other, but because they genuinely wanted to share experiences. Elena signed up for a pottery workshop in Italy for the summer, and Marcus booked the photography expedition to Iceland he'd been considering. They planned the trip separately but talked excitedly about sharing stories and photos when they returned. Amy graduated from college and decided to spend a year volunteering with an environmental organization before starting graduate school. David was accepted into an advanced music program that would require him to spend his senior year at a specialized school in the city. Both children were building independent lives that reflected their own interests and values rather than their parents' expectations. They learned something from watching us figure out how to be individuals within a relationship, Elena observed one evening as they worked together in the garden. They're not afraid to choose paths that are right for them, even if those paths don't meet traditional expectations. That's probably the best thing we could have taught them, Marcus agreed. That love doesn't require sacrificing yourself, and that you can build a partnership with someone without losing your own identity. Do you think we'll still be figuring this out 20 years from now? I hope so. I hope we never stop growing and changing and surprising each other. Elena stood up from the flower bed she'd been weeding and dusted off her hands. Marcus? Yeah? I'm happy. Not just content or okay, but actually happy. For the first time in years, I wake up most mornings excited about my life. Me too. And the best part is that I'm happy with you, not because of you. There's a difference. There is. And it makes everything we build together feel more solid because it's built on choice rather than need. That evening, they sat together on the patio, sharing wine and watching the sunset paint Elena's roses in shades of gold and pink. Marcus was editing a new essay on his laptop while Elena graded papers, both of them working on individual projects while enjoying each other's presence. I have something to tell you, Marcus said. What's that? I got an email from an agent today. She read my published essays and wants to talk to me about writing a book about marriage and personal growth. Elena looked up from her grading with excitement. Marcus, that's incredible. Are you going to do it? I think so. But I wanted to make sure you're comfortable with me writing about our relationship in more depth. The book would be mostly about my own journey, but our story is part of that story. I trust you to tell the truth about our experience without betraying my privacy or making me look foolish. And I think there are probably a lot of people who need to hear that marriages can be rebuilt on better foundations even after they've nearly fallen apart. So you're okay with it? I'm proud of it. You've become someone who has something worth saying about love and growth and the courage to change. Of course, I want you to share that with people who might benefit from hearing it. Marcus reached across the table and took Elena's hand. I love you. I love you too. But more than that, I like you. I respect you. I'm proud to be building a life with you, even though it's harder than the old way, especially because it's harder than the old way. Easy love isn't worth much. Love that requires you to become your best self, that challenges you to grow and change and surprise yourself, that's worth everything. As the sun set behind Elena's garden, Marcus reflected on the journey they'd taken from polite distance to genuine intimacy. Elena had been right that the old version of their marriage had been built on need rather than choice, on obligation rather than authentic connection. Breaking down that structure had been painful and frightening, but it had created something much more solid and satisfying. They were no longer the people who had gotten married 24 years earlier, and their relationship no longer looked like the conventional marriage they'd originally tried to create. But they were people who had chosen each other with full knowledge of each other's flaws and growth edges, people who were committed to supporting each other's continued evolution, people who have learned that the best partnerships are built by two individuals who are brave enough to keep becoming themselves. Marcus closed his laptop and moved his chair closer to Elena's. She leaned into him naturally, and they sat together watching the last light fade from the sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for growth, new chances to choose each other all over again. But tonight, they were exactly where they wanted to be, with exactly the person they wanted to be with, building exactly the kind of life that honored both their individual dreams and their shared commitment to love without limits. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.